Welcome to the Major Project Podcast, your inside look at the high-stakes world of billion-dollar projects.
Geoff, I believe you are maybe one of the world's leading experts, if not the leading expert on advanced work packages. Welcome to the podcast, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about your history and a little bit about your art.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. First of all, I really appreciate being invited to be here today. One of the issues we have with advanced work packaging is getting the message out. So this is helping, and I appreciate that. So thank you very much, Orion. So a little bit of history on me. So I was in construction. I was actually a pipe fitter for many years, and worked through the ranks of construction to become a project manager. Studied to be a project manager, and got involved with some collaboration organizations in Alberta when we were working on Megaprojects, and we were trying to figure out why they go sideways. We had a series of Megaprojects in the early 2000s that had really bad results. So I joined a committee of other owner representatives, and we did research for about 2 years, I guess, where we looked at projects that were being successful and ones that weren't being successful, and we tried to figure out what are the differences. And something that all of your viewers will understand is the difference was planning. But not just planning, it was good quality plans with a tangible deliverable. So our tangible deliverable from that was that the foreman gets a package. The foreman gets a package. Ideally, it's like a week long, and before we give it to the foreman, it has been proven. And we found that the contractors that were doing that were getting lots of work done, which is not news to anybody either. But anyway, that became the model for WorkFace Planning. WorkFace being, the workface in a coal mine, when that's where the pick hits the coal. So we coined that phrase based on the idea that it's all about the workers. It's all about the workers and the foreman. If we can give them everything they need, then they get a lot of stuff done. Now, if you don't give it to them, they don't get much done. No. So anyway, so that was the model. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, so I'm so you were on a committee then, kind of early on, looking at these things, and the committee sort of came to the conclusion it's like it's the moment of that when someone has something to do and they don't know what to do. Because I mean, I think our viewers all know. I think the stats are like 98% of all projects fail to meet their scope and schedule budget, and when you're in the sort of large scale project, those are hundreds of millions of dollars we're talking about. But anyway, so the committee, so you saw this, and then what happened from there? How did they come up with sort of the answer? How do you give those people the information they need?
So essentially, we were very strict on ourselves. We weren't trying to create an answer. We wanted to capture best practices. And so we had to have examples of where people were doing this and they were being successful. So we captured that, and we basically rolled that out to the industry and said, hey, these guys are building packages, giving it to the foreman and getting lots done. And they're very predictable, which is a bit wishy-washy, but and it's a bit more detailed than that. So we rolled that out at a series of conferences over up to 2005. One of the problems that we had was that people could only get that literature and go away and try it. They didn't really have any other support for that. So anyway, at the time, I decided to quit my job and hang my shingle up and say, hey, I'll help. Okay, I understand this well enough. So that was the start of our company. So then we were doing that for a number of years on a number of mega projects in Alberta, being successful. And then CII, the Construction Industry Institute out of the University of Texas, came to one of our conferences, saw what we were talking about and said, hey, this looks like it has merit. We would like to take it home and do a bit more research on it. So they formed a committee to do that, a research team. They came back after a couple of years and said, well, it's not actually just a construction problem. It's an engineering procurement construction problem.
Yeah.
It's okay to say we want packages, but if you don't have the drawings, you don't have the materials, you're not building packages. So essentially, they did the same thing. They went out into the industry and said, who's doing this? And they found some organizations that had alignment across what they engineered, what they procured, and then what they tried to build. And so the WorkFace Planning model that we developed in Alberta expanded into advanced work packaging, which was the bigger version of that.
So then maybe just break it down. Let's say that because I am a complete idiot, and we have a few folks on the call that are probably very junior in their understanding of project controls. So if we say work package, are we talking about a physical, work package that you hand to somebody? Kind of just take us through it. Like, I'm a foreman and I just started and I'm getting an advanced work package. What does that look like for you?
So yes, it's a physical package. But it can also just be a digital package. So the package that we give to the foreman is actually called an installation work package to separate it from the other packages. Ideally, it's a document that says, this is what we're trying to get done. So here's the scope. Here's your material. So we've organized for the material to be delivered to the site. We say, okay, we think it's 5 days work for 10 people. So you're going to earn 500 hours when you get this done. You're going to need these tools. You're going to need a crane. You're going to need this permits. Basically sort of setting the foreman up to understand an expectation of what we expect to get done, but also that we've done everything we can to try to make that happen. And now it's their role to execute.
Do you include, just in that package, do you include a list of risks? Is it almost like a mini project plan, or does it, is that part kind of abstracted out?
Yes, and that's actually a really good point. So in any plan, of course, you need quality and safety addressed. So certainly safety risks are identified in the plan, but also quality checkpoints, if you like. So, hey, when we do this, we need to have this quality documentation, or you need to call in this quality inspection. And also, of course, yes, there are risks. There are inherent risks in trying to do any work. Like, is the prerequisite work done? Do we have the right materials? Do they fit? All sorts of risks that could go wrong. So yeah, we have a bit of a risk register in the back of a package that says, this is what could go wrong. This is what to do if it does go wrong.
Yeah. Well, and you said that it seems like this is a natural evolution of the project management space. I know we've talked before offline about how when you originally started, and I felt this way about some of the data stuff as well, it's like, you're like, why isn't everybody just going for this? This is such a self-evident sort of natural progression for our industry. And I know you've been at it for a while, and those that work with you are having amazing success. And what do you think is the challenge? Is there, like, I guess if I'm a PM listening to this on a major project, or maybe an executive, like, how do you actually implement it? And what are the challenges to implementing it? Because it's like, where have you seen it, I guess, fail to be implemented properly? Or, how, like, if I'm a PM and I want to start this in my practice, how do you do it?
Okay, so first of all, and thank you for hitting on that. Project management is a unique discipline. So we talk about a project having engineering, procurement, and construction. Well, there is a conductor of that orchestra, which is called project management. So project management needs to be recognized as a holistic view of the project. I raised a couple of teenagers, so I often think of this as, I'm the parent in the room as the project manager, and I'm trying to get these teenagers to play nice with each other.
Yeah.
Essentially that's it. We're trying to get engineering to give procurement what they want and give construction what they want. Well, that for the longest time, we had this theory in megaprojects, especially, that if you siloed engineering, procurement, and construction, and then you just optimized each one of those, that we would end up with a good result. Well, the reality is that if you optimize engineering and procurement to their own budgets and schedules, then construction pay the price, because they are not producing the drawings and the materials that construction need. And of course, construction truly represents half of the cost of any project. So we are optimizing the smaller costs, and that construction are paying the big price. So where it fails, of course, is where we don't manage to break that model. So we don't get alignment across what we engineer, or the sequence of engineering, the sequence of procurement, to match the sequence of construction. So, and I've heard people talk about basically sort of flipping the table here, and we're making construction the boss. And we say to construction, one of the things we would do at the start of a project is to say to them, we'd have a path of construction workshop, and we say, imagine to the construction team, imagine construction in heaven. What does that look like?
Yeah.
Right? And of course, the construction guys are, okay, well, I do this first, and then I do this, and then I do this and this. And we've got engineering and procurement in the room. We're like, hey, is it possible that you guys could deliver that in that sequence? Right? And basically helping them understand the holistic approach to trying to get the project finished. So, yeah, it's a different way of thinking of relationships, if you like, between EP and C.
So when you work with orgs that come to you, and I know we got to talk about data centers, but I'm just like really want to get into this a little bit more. But like, say somebody, I'm a PM, I'm running a multi-billion-dollar project. Let's say I'm in execute, so I'm at a messy phase. Can I still come to you and have you help me with advanced work packages, or are we too far along? Would you say, like, and
So this question comes up in varying different ways. What if my project's really small? What if I've got different priorities on the projects? What if I'm too late? What if I can't control materials? Well, and that's why it's such a good foundational deliverable is the installation work package. It's all about that package. If that's all you do, if you just make sure that you don't, every time you give a foreman an instruction to work, that they can do the work. So don't put out work you can't do. Just put out work you can do, which is, I know, like, I love talking to new graduates that come into our industry, and I say that to them, and they're like, well, what were you doing before that? It's like, you wouldn't believe. So, yes, if you just focus on building packages that are executable, you will get results. And you can do that at any stage of the project. Of course, the earlier you get started down that path, the more packages you can build that are executable.
And okay, one last question, I guess. I'm super curious about, they talk about form over function, right? So at least in my world with developers, you can hand a developer a great project plan, almost like an advanced work package in, say, some app out there. And if they don't use the app, it's completely lost. Or if you deliver an email that says, I need you to do all these things, but the email is like misstructured and it says what it needs to say, but it's like the form of it, the design isn't good. It's like the message gets lost. And I'm curious if in the work package space, like if foremen, it's like how you present the work package also matters. And if you've done any like thinkings along those lines as well, like do you have a tool or tell me about the form.
So let's talk about two elements of that question. So we've got the foreman and how they execute, but also upstream of that, and all of those functions that we need in place in order to be able to build a package. So let's talk about the foreman first. So first of all, you're absolutely right. We have to train them to do this because they don't trust us. We've been treating them like sort of second class for ages, where we push a foreman into the field, we give them 10 people, we say, keep those guys busy and get it done. Yeah. And then we starve them for information and materials, and they can't get the crane and they don't have access and it takes ages to get a permit. So, they're scrambling trying to get stuff done. So they're going from that environment to where we say, give them a package and we say, hey, trust us, you'll be good now. And they're like, yeah, right. so they still don't. It takes time to go from basically survival mode into, okay, this is what I'm going to do over the course of the next 5 days. I'm going to do this and this and this and this. And so yes, we thought once we gave a package to a foreman, we were home. But the reality is you have to teach them how to plan and execute a week's work based on, yes, you're probably going to be able to do it. So that's the first part is, yes, we need to look after that because that is a change. Upstream of that, when we talk about the understanding if we can actually get stuff done, we actually, CII put out a list of 60 conditions that said, okay, when these conditions are in place, AWP works really well. And there's a whole bunch of things like, what does the schedule look like? Are you tracking progress? When we develop a purchase order, do we have CWPs in it? There's a bunch of conditions. So, so ideally, of course, this is sort of like the health check before you get to that foreman package. So ideally, we are running an audit, if you like, on the process as it develops to see how aligned are we with best practices, because that tells you a lot more about our ability to build these packages than the actual package. So there's a way to check that, and a way to, if you like, drive that behavior within the organization. And there's a way to help the foreman adapt to this new environment of plenty.
And then just as a, I guess like as a wrap before we move on to the data center part, like to zoom up and say, okay, you talk to me as a project manager. I'm like, great. My foremen have what they need. I love that. And again, I don't want to sound like a commercial for AWP, but I went to one of your presentations, so I love it so much. But if I'm the project director, and I am trying to tell my stakeholders, what's the ROI on this? Because great, foremans have what they need, whatever. They won't be second-class citizens. That's fine, but like, let's break it down to the dollars here. Like, I'm running $1 billion project. What does this actually, how does this benefit to either the schedule, the cost, and or the risk reduction? Like, how do you get that ROI and make the case?
So we struggled with that question for a long time. Now we have about 10 years ago, we started to apply that scorecard that I talked about with CII, and at the same time we did tool time studies. So the benefit of that is you see, okay, this is how aligned a project is with best practices based on the scorecard and the CII list of best practices. And we go out in the field and we say, and this is how busy the workers are, because we did a tool time study. Now, as you can imagine, there's a correlation between how organized the project is and how busy the workers are, right? And I think that's your question. Is, hey, what's the return on this? So the great thing about that is after you get a whole pile of those projects, and we have 70 of them, so we have 70 mega projects over the last 10 years from around the world. You get that pile of data, you can average the data to say, okay, so on average, when a project is this much compliant with best practices, then their workers are going to be this busy. And if they are this much compliant, if they're only 45% compliant, their workers are going to be this busy. Once you have those points established, you can say, okay, this is how much it actually changes. So the answer is 22%. So the workers, so the difference between 45% compliant with best practices and 75% compliant, so it's not, there's not perfect, but there's the average. The difference is 22% busier workers.
Wow.
So, in a rough translation, let's say that you get 20% more done every day. Just think about that across 5,000 workers.
Yeah.
So it works out to about 10% of the total cost of the project is what's on the table, which is a crazy statement. You should not be able to move a $1 billion project 10%. Right? But that's essentially what's on the table.
And I think that won't be on the table forever, but it's on the table today. Because what I've noticed is the stats are horrifying about project execution. One of the reasons that I was hoping to do this podcast was that I think our industry doesn't have great track records. And I would love to see the world be able to create projects that aren't over budget and over schedule all the time. It feels like people just assume, like, if I do $1 billion project, it's going to be late. It's going to be a wreck. And
we accept it.
Yeah, we accept it as fact. And there are these things that I think we're progressing in our art form, and eventually we're going to crack the code. And this is this is a huge piece of it. So,
well, that if nothing else, I would like to share with people the fact that today, the reality is it's a choice. You have the choice to finish on time and on budget.
Yeah, that's a great way to say it. That's interesting. Okay. All right. So I think we've talked about work packages. We've talked about advanced work packages. We didn't talk much about the Pepsi model versus the EPC model. We kind of dived into that of sort of the old versus the new, more of a holistic look. Can we switch a little bit right now, Geoff, and talk about data centers? Because I know you're working in the space. I think how many data centers do you remember are coming up over the next 5 years?
This is this is just the US. Basically 2,700 megaprojects before 2030. So, if each one of those is in the range of 100 to 500 million, you can do the math on that and understand that, it's basically a gold rush.
Yeah. And for the owners that are building those data centers, it's also a landmine where, well, I think a couple things. Like you and I are in this space of mega project build outs, and I liken it to like ship captains, where once I was on a cruise ship in the Mediterranean. I'm originally from Alaska, and I got to meet the captain, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I worked in Alaska. I did that, and I realized that the ship captain world is actually really small. Like they all know each other. It's a space, even though it's a worldwide thing. It's actually a very small art, and I think that our space is like that as well. So when you say all of a sudden, hey, we're going to build 3,000 data centers, it's like, well, who's going to be the, project director of those 3,000 project directors? We don't have that many people. Obviously, we're going to have to bring them up through the universities, but in 5 years. And so I guess the other part of that I think is interesting is we need repeatable, successful things like AWP and products that make sense, or productized service offerings that make sense to like execute on that work at scale, like in a thoughtful way. So anyway, that's I think that's one of the big challenges of putting together 3,000 data centers right now.
Yep. And that's a great foundation for this conversation. I should start by saying, we'll have to do this again in 2030, and we'll have a laugh at what we're talking about right now, because I'm sure it'll be wildly different answer.
Yeah, we went from Pepsi model to EPC to AI just does everything model in 2030.
Yeah.
Right.
So importantly, the foundations of AWP are still present. If we want to get it done, we need to get back to, every time we send a foreman into the field, they have to have a package. And so that doesn't change. If we want to get done, we want to do things productively. That's our stake in the ground. So the big thing about the Pepsi model, so maybe we should just talk that through, I guess, for listeners, that we, in a typical environment, we engineer it, and then we say, okay, if we're going to build it this way, we're going to need all this equipment. And then we go ahead and construct it. So we put all the parts together. What's happening in the data center world is that there is a major gold rush for equipment. So rather than being able to say, okay, this is what I want, and then going out into the market to find it, you need to go out into the market and figure out what can I buy or what's available, and use a combination of that answer to come up with what your capacity, or the capacity you're trying to achieve, and then you design around what you could procure. So that's the procurement, engineering, planning, construction, initiate model, which is the Pepsi model. So that makes things different for us. Of course, it's a strange space for engineering to not be able to just say, this is what I want, therefore go buy it. It's basically, if you like, an agile engineering space where you say, okay, you can't have one of these, you can have to have two of these and one of those, and maybe use this one to patch that one together. And then you have to design around that. Complicated by technology, which is changing every 6 months. So, that as much as we want to build something and have it operate for the next 50 years, our data centers will not do that. The technology is going to change every year, if not 6 months. So
yeah.
Basically, everything we build has to be modularized so it can be pulled out and the new stuff put in. The complication of designing something that is both renewable, if you like, and made up of a combination of parts is the challenge that we've got right now. So anyway, they're the foundational challenges for data centers. However, people are doing that and they're being successful. So it's just a different way of looking at how do we make this happen. And of course, some of the big players are actually going further upstream to buy the manufacturing capacity of the industry. We hear about car manufacturers buying lithium mines. The same.
Yeah,
they're trying to control their own supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely. The lithium race is really interesting, actually. The lithium mining battle. I think we're going to have somebody on who did a bit of a deep dive on that, who's a major project. James Wiseman, who has gone deep on the lithium rabbit hole, which would be a really interesting chat. Okay, here's a question I have for you on this. Because like you're saying, data centers are very different and procurement's very different now in the space. You've been working on several of these large data center build outs. And I'm curious about the owners because they're techies, which is kind of a first in our industry in many ways, where a lot of major projects in the past maybe were like government politicians or oil and gas executives, maybe a mining company executive, something like that. And I think their minds work very different than, say, Mark Zuckerberg. He's like, hey, I'm going to build 50 data centers. And when you report to him and you say, hey, this is how we do it, he's been building Facebook, investing billions, building a software package, using agile methodology, completely flipping the PM space on its head. And it's been working for him and other like large tech companies. So I'm curious if you've seen that sort of play out in the way that these projects, the expectations of these projects, like how you work with those owners. I guess maybe you could just talk a little bit about sort of how those people how to interact with these new types of buyers in the major project space.
Yeah, so we've had a couple of tough conversations around that. So one of the before data centers, we were involved in helping the construction of some automated warehouses. So use Amazon as an example, but there's lots of others out there. So they basically tried to build a total automation warehouse so that people aren't picking parts, that it's totally automated. So that is a high-tech, data-centric environment. The problem is those guys have no idea how to build that. So when we went to them and said, I know you guys are in the business of data, but you suck at building, right? Because you can't figure out how to manage your data to tell you what you can build and actually get it built.
Yeah.
They have a very low tolerance for being told that they suck at data, right? So, but essentially, that they need to understand the construction model to understand that it needs data and of course, the true, and we're learning this with AI, the true understanding or the true value of data is understanding what to do with it or how to use it. You can't just have this huge swamp of data and say, okay, we've got it. You have to understand what, how do we draw from that to understand, what we can do, what we can't do, what we should do, what we should be focused on. So for the data center guys right now, you can imagine going to Google and telling them that they suck at data. Right?
Yeah.
But they do, because they don't know what to do with it. They need to understand that Pepsi model, but also the execution of construction model. And that is coming all the way back to project management as a profession. This is where project management is so important, because project management is a unique profession, and we need people that understand how to execute projects in order to completely be on top of this whole model of, where do I get data? How do I use it? How do we stay on top of that? So yes, it's a unique conversation, but of course the smart guys, smart people know what they don't know. And of course, that, Google and Meta and Microsoft and, those guys are really good at what they do. But building their infrastructure is not part of that.
Yeah. I think, so I have a lot of experience where I bring in people with sort of comp sci degrees, teach them data analytics, and then we apply them to the project space Whereas a lot of people that are doing reporting and stuff, they come from the project space, and then they learn some of the techniques of data science through the job, like on the job training. And I've noticed that, the way I do it, I like it because I get more of the technical talent. There's pros and cons to both, but one thing that's interesting is when you take someone that's really, really super smart, has gone through a comp sci program, gets data modeling, it takes several years. It takes a lot of training to get their heads around project controls, how the data works, because there's these complicated concepts. And really, I think for me, at least, one of the clicking moments is like, you're comparing sets of data from one to the next, oftentimes, and looking for deviations between, which is a very different way of processing data. And it's an area that they don't really teach in comp sci school very much. Like, they'll teach you about data structures, but there's not like a class on like differential reporting for, advanced data structures or something, which is really where I think our art is struggling.
Yes, 100%. We have great success when we have our data scientists paired with our grizzly old construction guy. And he says, the question is, and we pose this to project managers all the time, what do you need to know? And of course, if they just start with, okay, I want to know how many of these I've got, or I want to know, what we need next month, or I want to know how many people we should have, or I want to know how many work fronts are open, or anything, then the data scientist can go ahead and say, okay, I've probably got that data. Let me try that. Right? But they are two unique skill sets. Ideally you bring them together in order to build consumable data, we call it, which is actually how every app on your phone works. Every app on your phone is made to be consumable. But yes, that's the challenge.
Okay, so drawing us back to data centers, I think we walked a little bit away from that, and just want to get you back on there. Let's say I'm going to build a data center. We're in sort of pre-FID. We're doing some evaluation work. Like, what would you say? Like, if you're listening to this podcast, you're like, I'm going to be one of those people that builds 5,000 data centers. I've got one. What advice would you give this person? Maybe they just accepted the role of project director. What would Geoff say they should do? What's their to-do list, perhaps?
I guess it's first of all to understand the problem. So to understand the Pepsi model, or why you would even consider that. And then, of course, to find, the other couple of big problems that we've got in the industry is that, we haven't done this before. We've got a very shallow pool of people that have done it before, and they haven't done it very well. So, that basically, let's just start with a blank page and say, nobody knows how to do this. Right. So, that's probably a good place for a director to start and say, okay, so what we need is, we don't need people to come up and say, hey, I've done this before, you're in good hands. We need people who are flexible to say, you know what, I'm with you, I'm going to figure it out. Right, let's see if we can get this together. So, and you need an engineering company that will do that. But also procurement, that procurement, this is totally different from procurement. Right? You don't go to a procurement guy and say, go out there and see what you can find. Right? You give them a specific list of what you want, and they put that out to a whole bunch of different vendors, and they get answers, and they pass on the answers. Well, now we're asking them to be inventive and resourceful. And of course, doing that globally. One of the other problems that we have is this whole imperial metric thing. So, that when you're sourcing things from around the globe, well, you got to know that, that we use an imperial system here. So, that understanding or getting procurement people that understand that. And then, of course, you've got the complication of shipping and manufacturing and things that are on top of that. But so we need procurement folks that are flexible. We need engineering that is okay with the idea that they're going to work hand in hand with procurement till they can find a combination of equipment that they can use. And of course, then they're going to, they're probably going to have a pile of problems going forward to solve as well that are unique and different. But ultimately, it's a flexible engineering, procurement that are flexible and that are innovative. And then, of course, your construction. You need your construction team in early, because they're going to, if you roll this out to a construction team and you say, okay, we want to put in a unit. We're going to have all this infrastructure around it. We're going to run cable to it, and we're going to run air conditioning and cooling and things. How do you want to do that? And of course, ideally, procurement and engineering are listening to that, and we're building a schedule based on the combination of what can you get your hands on, how long is it going to take to design it, and of course, what sequence would we like to build it in. So that's a different way of approaching a project for a project director. So hopefully I answered your question there. I think for a project director, first understand that nobody's done this before. But we know that to be productive, we have to have installation work packages, and the way to get there is to understand, what we should get and how we should sequence that. Also, one of the other big influences, which is true today as well in normal projects, is that the procurement is going to drive the schedule. Now, that's the foundation. When can I have this stuff? Okay, we're going to build the schedule around when that gets here. And then, of course, have a fanatical focus on holding those dates. Fly over there, have a look at the production facility, see your piece of equipment being built. Be confident that it's
there on the shop floor.
We've seen instances where it gets built and then it goes out to the highest bidder. Right, so you're put at the back of the line again because you weren't in that race. So you need contracts that of course support that. The idea of lump sum is probably not going to be present for a while. Nobody knows how to do this. Nobody knows how much it's going to cost or how long it's going to take. So trying to absolve risk by having a lump sum contract in that space is not going to work. This is going to be about flexibility and maybe the emergence of true project management.
What do you see as true project management? Tell me that.
Well, understanding that it's a unique discipline. This is not a function of engineering. This is a unique discipline. I actually think that in the future we will have, potentially a separate company be the project managers, and we've got examples of this.
Yeah.
So they don't really have a vested interest in EP or C. Their job is to conduct the orchestra.
There's a book I read a long time ago. I don't remember the author. It's called Bare Knuckle Project Management. And the theory behind it was that you, and I tell this to my PMs, but it's like you're the project advocate. So I always say, like, there's different stakeholders, but there has to be one person whose only interest is the project itself. And you're the project advocate. And so if that means like you're just sort of this independent third party that's dispassionately giving people the news and advocating for the project, whatever that might mean, whether it's, hey, you're the wrong odor for this project, you need to get off it, whatever, just being able to say some of the things that you would never be able to say if your incentives aren't aligned properly. So I agree with you. I think that the further you can get into that independence space, even if you aren't technically independent, if you can find a way to get your reputation up as a person that's sort of trustable, that can give that kind of news, that can make a huge difference in your project.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we do see a lot of owners step into that space, but the smart ones or the mature owners understand that that's not something that we can put your existing team on. That you're going to need to go out and hire project management skills and build a project management department. But you and I talked quickly about my house build before we got started here. So that's a great example. It's my money. I'm going to live in that house. I want it to be built the right way. I don't want to, I want to get in there as soon as I can. I don't want to spend too much money doing it, but, and I'm fanatical about quality. Well, that I don't have a dog in any of those hunts, except that I want the whole thing to work for me. So yes, it's a good example of overall, or if you like, third-party project management.
Yeah. Well, okay. So that's sort of like the advice for a new project manager. Do you have any stories from some of your data center work so far that might be some challenges that you might have overcome, or anything that, could help us prepare for the journey?
So one of the things that I talked briefly about was the shallow pool of knowledge, but there's also the shallow pool of experience and skills. And a simple example of that is electricians. That most often when we think we have an electrician, we think we've got an electrician. Well, in the data center world, that's not true, because there's high voltage and there's connecting light bulbs. So they are two separate professions, and the electricians will tell you that. In the world of data centers, we need a whole pile of high voltage people, because that's where all of the work is. And when you put low voltage people working on high voltage processes, you have a lot of problems. Simple things that are really, really dangerous if you don't get them right. So anyway, that's a huge problem for us. I think we need to recognize that we need a lot more training on safety when it comes to hooking up high voltage, and we need to have just a general awareness of that. So, of course, that comes from quality control. So one of the problems, of course, we have is time to market is the driver. We're fanatical about getting to market. We must make sure that does not impinge upon quality and safety. One of the foundations I was taught as a tradesperson was the quickest way to build anything is to build it once. So
that's a really great saying.
It's very simple. So even if you take your time and you get it right, that's the quick way, right? And we need to understand that and apply it. Quality testing is ultra important. So the other thing, of course, in data centers is that they have a very low tolerance for problems when they're operational, because they need a 99.99% uptime.
Right.
So quality is all important. Redundancy, of course, as you're designing it, to make sure that you have a bit of a cushion there. So there are a couple of the little problems is skill sets. But of course, as we talked about, the whole idea of being flexible and sort of agile is a good word. Agile and being adapting to today's problems will have to be a skill set for engineering and procurement.
And where do you think it intersects with, like, say you're building a data center for Google? There's also you said there's the electricians, but then there's also sort of the actual engineers that are building out the machines, and they have specialty hardware as well. And does that fit into your work packages at this point? Or are you just like, we're just going to build the server racks and then you throw in whatever you want. We're going to make the facility, and then we don't care what happens inside of it. We'll give you this much power. We'll have the data wires, and that's it. And then the owners come in and do their own thing because those change out so much. Like, how does that work?
So a lot of that is true. The owner loves like to have that finishing touch, if you like, on a data center, and we certainly see that for good reason. But even the infrastructure is changing. That we look at cooling. Cooling is a great big issue, of course. So we used to cool with air, then we used to cool with water. Now we cool with submersion, and of course, they are three different buildings. Right? So you can't just switch one out for the other there. That is a different design.
Yeah.
So not sure where the next one's going, but even when we look at the design of the infrastructure, we need to be flexible to know that we've already gone through that transition, and we'll probably have other transitions that we go through there. So it needs to be flexible. It needs to be modularized. But yes, having the owner do the final connection and configuration is a really good idea, because that's where they do have expertise.
Well, so I've been talking a lot about the owner and the folks actually building data centers. And I think what we're saying here is there's real constraints right now over the next 5 years. 3,000 data centers ish are going to be built, and procurement's a major issue. You've got people issues. It's going to be a really fun space. I think a lot of people that like challenges go into the project controls, project management world. So obviously we need a lot of people. Now let's flip this around and talk about, like, I'm a university student. I'm listening to this podcast. I'm excited about data centers, or I'm excited about advanced work packages. How do I, like, those two things are almost separate tracks, but how would you advise someone that's a student that wants to go into this as a career? Like, where would they start?
So interestingly, there are piles of data center conferences going on right now. So my advice would be to take your resume and go to one, or go to several, because the industry is hungry for people that are just interested in going here. You don't have to show up and say, "Hey, I've done this before." You're just like, "Hey, I'm flexible. I know how to learn," and I think this is a great place to be. So that would be the start, and we've seen that at conferences before, and we actually have some people working with us now that we found that way. Right? They came to us, which is awesome. So that would be an easy way to get in there. But also, a lot of the stuff that we know and a lot of the skills that we already have are near and dear to the solution that we're going to find here, and that is data management. That ultimately, and especially when you talk about project controls, that. There's a great project management expression that says, if you measure it, you manage it. So, which is Project Controls 101. Understanding how to measure it is one of our other challenges. What percentage complete are we when we finish procurement? Well, that might be the hardest part. So we could maybe count that as half done. But understanding what that equation is and how to gauge the level of effort required and the level of time required is going to be an evolving skill set. But ultimately, we do have to learn how to measure it. In the project controls world, understanding how to measure, procurement against engineering, and of course, construction is actually physical construction. So that's much easier to understand how much we got done, how much there is left. But we have to start measuring. And of course, I would encourage the industry to share that. We've always done this and kept those cards really close to our chest because we think that it's competitive advantage. Well, advanced work packaging is an example of collaboration in the industry. And I promise you, we all have the same problems. And collectively, we know the answers, but individually, we don't. One of the things that we have as mankind is this ability to share and discuss and explore answers. So make use of that and go to these conferences, present your findings, talk to other people, and we'll get better and better at this. And of course, it's not about having data that somebody else doesn't have. That's not going to give you an advantage. What's going to give you an advantage is that you're really good at it and understanding what needs to get done and when it needs to get done, and that you can create a predictable outcome based on that agility, which doesn't sound right.
Yeah. I mean, I like to liken it to, how there's like, if you're installing a program and the little bar goes like, right? It's like installing. So like, the goal is, if you're a user and you look at that and it goes, and then it goes backwards, you're like, what is going on, right? It would be super frustrating. And then also, and so that's where you get screwed up, where you're measuring progress and then progress goes in reverse. The people looking at that status bar at a high level, it's really upsetting. So like, I think one goal when you're measuring is to say, okay, are you measuring reality or not? Because they're looking at a progress bar for their install. And then the other thing that I think happens is, and you see this with programs, it goes, and it gets to 99%. And then you're just sitting there and you're like, I thought this program was installed. And it's just like, no, we're 99% friends. It's good. But it's not good. And in fact, that 99%, how long it sits there, oftentimes, there's a threshold where you're like, I can take a little bit, but if it's going to go for too long, we have a problem. And I think that can also happen with projects where it's like you want a smooth progression where you start at 0 and you end at 100, and the rate of that progress or bar is true to the reality of the actual project itself. So if you say it's 99%, it should be 99%, not 82. And so that, I think that's part of the art. I'm sort of simplifying it, I think, in many, many ways. But to me, that's the art of like the data and the sort of measurement that you're talking about is getting that accurate progress bar going. Yeah.
It's a status that we call done, but.
Done, but. I need to get you on to just give us all the phrases. I'm going to make a little clip scene of all these different really awesome ways to think about engineering. Well, so I guess like talking about careers and getting people involved, would you say there's certain degrees then that really matter? I mean, do you think the data, you're sort of talking about the data? I think in school, a lot of times people can go the sort of data science track, MIS track, or they can go the sort of engineering track. Do you have strong preferences for that? Do you think either one is good?
So yeah, either one is good. However, I'm going to defer to a presentation that I saw at a conference, and the guy got up and I think his stat was like 25%. So he said like 25% of the jobs that we work now did not exist when we were at college. So you could not study for them.
Yeah.
So your college, what you're studying at college is going to be a foundation. The skill set we're going to need to design and procure and execute these data centers, that doesn't exist yet. So give yourself an engineering or data science foundation, but understand that that gets you to the starting line. Right? After 4 years, you're at the start line, and now we're going to start to learn.
Okay, so I know we're running out of time. Let's take this back to, you said we were going to get together in 2030 again and do an uptake. Can I get your forecast? Because you said a lot of things aren't going to exist. A lot of things are going to change. AI has arrived. That's obviously going to impact us in a major way. Do you have any predictions or thoughts about where the industry is heading? Hopefully advanced work packages continues its meteoric rise. But could you give us some predictions perhaps, or some thoughts?
So I think that, there's a couple of things that change industries and that change. There's quite often like a rupture. Uber was a rupture.
Mm. Yeah.
We were stuck in the taxi world. We were happy with it. And then Uber just, boom, here's a rupture. And the world changed from that point forward. And so we will have ruptures in our project management world. And I'm hoping that AWP will be part of that. It'll be exactly what I said. We have to understand that predictable execution is a choice. And if you come in late or you overspend the budget, you had the choice to go there and you chose not to. Right? So we need to get to that state of maturity. So I think that that's important, is that we understand that. But also, who knows where AI is going to take us? It's hard to imagine, except that we have, I think of, well, it's actually not AI, it's machine learning, but I mean, it's collective wisdom. And when we learn to harness that collective wisdom, and you can ask an AI program, okay, what's the best way to build a data center? And it spits out, procurement. It can build, right? Or maybe we get a program that says, okay, I want this level of capacity, and you put that into a program. It searches the world for what is available and spits back your procurement plan and says, okay, you can get this stuff, and it'll all fit together, and it's available. Do you want to order it? Maybe that's where AI is going to take us. And I think that, they're both real scenarios where we should be able to get the whole world, the manufacturing capacity of the whole world in an app. that tells us, what we can get and where it's busy and, how much it is and what the level of quality is. And, we should be able to do that fairly soon because you can sort of do that with AI now. Anyway, so I think that's where our business is going. But one of the other things that I think is going to be an accelerant to that is regulation. So, one of the things that I'm doing sort of on the side here is working with governments around the world, asking them to lead the way here. Because essentially what we're doing is we're saying we need some rules in place that allow us to be professional. Just simply, I think of the UK government and Singapore have both mandated BIM models. So if you work for them on any of their government projects, you have to have a building information model, which is basically a 3D model that's intelligent. Right? So they've taken the first step there. I hear that actually the Russians are considering AWP as a mandatory best practice in their execution of projects. That we need something like that as a trigger for the rest of the industry to say, okay, we're going to have to step up our game here. That change comes from desperation. You've heard of the burning platform standard. We need a burning platform because if we don't have one, we'll just keep doing what we're doing and it'll be acceptable. It'll be acceptable to run late and over budget, and we'll be fine with it. We've worked for the last 20 years or 50 years. So we need some regulation that says, no, that's no longer acceptable. And that's really the job of government, is to help us encourage us to go places that we don't really want to go. So that's the industry has to go there. And I know a whole bunch of the owners have already gone there. You look at the big oil and gas, and actually even, some of their data center guys, Microsoft and Google, I know, are talking about mandating AWP. They don't know exactly what they just said, but they know that it's a level of professionalism that they're going to need to make this work. So anyway, yes, we need regulation as well.
That's awesome. We have so much to talk about around those lines because I'm sort of coming from the data side of it. So I've been working on, I think one of the issues that I see in our industry is that we don't actually have a common data model. So that in the BIM space, we have a data standard, but in the project controls sort of project data space, and I would guess in the AWP space, we have the systems. So like ISO 21508 is awesome. And it takes you through all of this is what you do for cost schedule integration, blah, blah, blah. But when you actually say, okay, where's the data model? It's like, oh, well, that's in this program. That's P6. Oracle built that. But Oracle built schedule, and then they kind of half built maybe the cost piece. And then you got SAP has their data model. And so something I'm working on for 2026 is to try to create a gold standard open source data model where you can say, hey, this is how we model this information. And I don't care what systems you have, this is the one that's aligned to ISO 21508. So if you want to do reporting, because it gets really complicated really fast on the reporting and people get tripped up. And so kind of going along with what you're saying, it starts by having that ISO 21508. You have to have that. And then I think next level, so you are, as an industry leader, the industry leader in advanced work packages, you're sort of setting those standards with governments. And then I think where I can come in a little bit, or somebody like me has to say, all right, you've defined the core system. Here is a standard common data model. And they did this with BIM. And they've done this in healthcare, they have HL7. The MLS was really successful by defining a common data standard for house listings. So there's all these industries that come out with these data standards, and then that creates that explosion in the industry of wow, we can talk to each other. We can, the reports can be shared because it's not all, the same data, or it's not all different data structures. Anyway, so we'll have to chat about that sometime. I'd love to connect into your AWP standards and practices.
Okay, so the other thing that leads us to, of course, is once you have standards, you have to have measurement. So it has to be it has to be measured. So you need to go and, much like ISO does, there's an auditing process on whether you're compliant with the standard. Well, we need something like that with our data standards. Something we haven't touched on, which is a huge slippery slope. I don't know if we've got the next 3 or 4 hours we can talk about this, but these data centers are going to require power.
Yeah.
Yes, which is a whole other subject, I think, is that, how do we get that? And how do we not make the price of residential power crazy because of that?
Well, and didn't they there's a saying, I'm going to get this wrong, you probably know it, but it's, we're moving from like watts per person to watts for bots. So when you look at like total demand for energy, it's moving away from in the past. And what I think is fascinating about that actually is that I was just talking to a city manager in Boise, and they're building this massive data center, and the power requirements for that are insane. And you have like, it's very different, I think, if you're a power provider and you have like 50,000 people you're going to be servicing. That's like you have all these little individual people, and collectively they have a voice, but individually they don't. Whereas these data centers, it's like you have a $5 billion data center and you have like a very strong voice coming to the city or coming to a government. And it's sort of a single person or small group that are saying we need this much power. So it's a very different dynamic that these cities and states are operating against, where you have, before it was more of a collectivist power sort of dynamic. And now it's turning into, I think, maybe collectivist dynamic versus like large organizations that are asking for massive power draws from the grid and otherwise. I don't know how that's going to shake out. Do you?
Oh, that's a conversation for a different day.
Very good. Well, let's switch over then and just get a little bit, I'd love to touch a little bit on your business, because I know that, and hear about your book. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about how people could get access to your book, and also like tell us about your business that you started that I think sort of was informed by that initial like AWP spark that you got. Yeah.
It was a gap. It was a gap that had to be filled. That if we wanted people to actually build packages and give them to foremen, then we had to provide support to do that. So that was the initial spark, and that's still today's model. What I did do is I essentially, after we had done that in Canada for a while, I wrote a book and said, okay, this is what we do, this is how we do it. With the intent that people didn't have to hire us to figure this out. They could just read the book. And a lot of people did that. They just said, all right, yeah, hey, we're going to do work packages. With it's pretty simple. Here's the rules. Away we go. Now, that worked while we were doing WorkFace Planning. Then several years later, when it expanded into advanced work packaging, I had to rewrite that or publish the next version, which was the one that is out there now. So anyway, the first book was called Schedule for Sale. And I wrote that because I wanted people to think about the title. And you'll see this in my writing. I quite often mix up the way that I write so that it wakes up the reader. And that's what I really wanted to do with that title. What do you mean schedule for sale? How can you buy a schedule? Well, you can buy a schedule, right? But you can't buy it with money. You got to buy it with effort and time and process, right? You can get schedule. So anyway, the second book is called Even More Schedule for Sale, which is basically the process of synchronizing engineering, procurement, and construction. And I must have done something right. I know people read the book and it resonates with them. And most people that have been in the project industry any length of time, they read the book and they're like, yeah, I didn't learn anything, but I have a holistic understanding of how things fit with each other, which is really what we're trying to achieve. The other challenge I might throw out there to see if this is real or not is people said that after they've met me, or perhaps after they've heard me talk, that they can hear me when they're reading the book. So
maybe you need an audiobook edition then.
We have an audiobook. It's also available in 4 other languages. And And that was basically because each of those other markets came to us. So the Russians came to us and said, hey, we have workers who don't speak English and we need to communicate with them. It was actually a professor at the Polytechnic in St. Petersburg that came to me and said, hey, I want to give this book to my class and get them to translate it. And I was like, sure. So that's what he did for like a semester. They basically just focused on the book and they translated it a little bit at a time, argued about the translation, make sure that everybody was on page. And of course, at the end of it, everybody knew exactly what the book was talking about. And we ended up with a translation. And that's important. You don't just Google translate this type of concept. You have to understand it. So we did the same thing in Mandarin, Spanish, and Portuguese. Portuguese and Spanish, of course, for the South American market, which is booming with application of AWP. Those guys are really keen to make this work.
That's really cool. Yeah, I mean, I think your book is sort of the gold standard for AWP in the industry, I believe. Yeah.
We're certainly trying to make it that way. It's supposed to be an instructional book that sort of helps you conceptualize the process. One of the other interesting tools we're working on right now that maybe we can talk about in the future is something we're calling AWP Chat. So it's basically just a chat bot based on published AWP data. So we're taking all of the world's published AWP data, put it into a chat bot and said, okay, now we're going to ask questions and it's going to draw from just that published data. And so, of course, that allows organizations like COA or CAI to say, well, somebody calls them and says, well, explain this AWP thing to me. They'll be able to say, no, just go to chat AWP and AWP chat and ask that the questions. But of course, we're trying to facilitate an understanding or level of understanding with what AWP is and what to do. And so we're hoping that it will become a resource for people where they can just go there and ask questions and get good quality answers.
Is that available now or will it become available? Okay. How can I sign up to be on a mailing list for that?
It's a concept at the moment where we're trying it out. It seems to work really good. Watch this space. That's I would say. So we haven't even figured out if we can do it yet. So first thing we have to do is talk to the data owners to say, hey, is it okay if we make your data available to everybody? So that's the first step.
And then maybe just talk a little bit about your company as we wrap up. I'm sure people are super interested about you, how they might be able to connect with you, and also just the story of what you do. Maybe if it's someone in government or somebody looking to build a data center that wants to do it, like how do they work with you, or do you even work with people anymore? Are you mostly just on the speaker tour these days?
No, our company is alive and thriving and growing. We sort of average about 30 project managers at any one time that work for us that are essentially embedded in projects around the world. And they go there to coach the project on how to apply AWP. 3 specific areas that we target. So first of all, engineering and procurement. Somebody needs to basically coach those whole teams on, okay, this is how you do this. We have information management, which is digital data. Okay, this is how we produce digital data. This is how we standardize it. This is how we host it. This is what we do with it. And then, of course, work packaging. So somebody to work with the construction group to say, okay, let's build some IWPs. All right, let's figure out what constraint management actually looks like, and then somebody to manage that whole environment. So basically, we're like the coaching team. We are embedded with projects, so we're not consultants. We're project managers, and essentially, we just we're working with a whole range of companies in that space that want to get good at doing AWP themselves, and they hire us for a project or two. Their people learn how to do this, and then they use us to come back and just do some audits on their process. So that's the business model.
Are you typically for the life of the project, or do you come in just for a little bit? Like, what's your ideal?
So typically for the life of the project, because
that makes sense.
yeah, the structure of the whole process needs to be, if you like, tweaked from start to finish. And then, as I said later on, after our organization matures down the AWP space, then we might come in for just portions of the project.
Okay, got it. And then just tying it back to that 10%, it sounds like really, if you're, whatever, you have a $150 million budget for construction, you bring in a couple folks on your side, and that really de-risks the project, possibly boosts productivity quite a bit, depending on when you bring them in and how, could have a pretty positive impact to the project. That's pretty cool.
So the biggest expense when you apply AWP is the WorkFace planners. We need planners to build IWP. So that's the biggest portion of the cost. Our cost is insignificant compared to that. By the way, in a model to try to help answer that, we said, all right, let's take $1 billion project and do the math. And so it costs you about $10 million to apply AWP on $1 billion project. Now, if you realize that full 10%, you can reduce the cost of that project by $100 million.
Wow.
So that's 1,000% return.
Yeah.
So even if you don't do a very good job of it and you only get a 500% return and the project finishes on time, there's enormous benefit. So it's not even close. That it's a terrific investment to just go down this path, even if you don't get it right. If you stumble through the first project and you get it on the second project, and of course the other consideration is, if we are in a continuous improvement model, if you're not doing AWP, what are you doing?
Yeah, it's true. Got to be doing something. Yeah.
Yes.
What is the next step?
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on, sharing all this. So if somebody wants to connect with you, are you on LinkedIn? How would you advise they reach out?
So we have a website, of course, Insight-AWP. We actually have a bunch of YouTube videos up that we've posted. So if you search advanced work packaging, if you wanted to see those numbers that I talked about, we put a video up there called AWP by the numbers, which walks through all of those the project results. We've got a great video up there that you might want to look at as a future state. Something that we're doing on some projects now, but not too many, is called augmented reality in construction. And the end game of this is that once you have all that data and you have all these plans, you then use that to use augmented reality. And we're actually doing that on projects where the foreman has an iPad instead of a hard copy package, and he can see what he's supposed to build, which is awesome state.
That's huge. That's awesome. What was the name of the YouTube for that? It's just augmented reality
in construction.
Okay. And we'll put all that in the description below so people can link into those things. Thanks so much, Geoff, for coming on. This was a fantastic conversation. And we're always trying to look for ways to, we're talking, the Major Project Podcast is projects that are $1 billion and up. And I think one of our goals is sort of inform the community, advance our art, but also we're looking for those like $1 billion lessons. And I feel like AWP and that 10% is what really sticks with me. It's like, here's how you can save $100 million. And I hope the listeners are latching onto that, because I think it's pretty exciting when you find an area that you can potentially level up in our art. So thanks for doing that.
You're most welcome. So I will tell your listeners that the videos are our gift to them, because if they decide that they want to go down this path, they're going to have to explain themselves to somebody else. Right? So the videos are that tool. So the AWP by the numbers is good to have a look at, but ultimately it should be a tool in your back pocket, because basically you need to convince somebody else to try this. Here's the evidence.
Awesome. All right, Geoff. Well, thanks so much for joining, and I look forward to following up at a minimum in 2030, but hopefully more, because we have so many things to talk about.
The story might change next year. We'll have to.
So true. All right. Well, thanks for coming on. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks for listening.